The sun hung like a molten coin above the Montana horizon when Lila Whitman's life burned to ashes before her eyes. Standing in her homespun dress, soot smeared across her tear-streaked face, she watched the last of the roof timbers collapse into what had been her family's humble cabin. She'd been gone only long enough to fetch water from the creek, returning to find her home engulfed in flames and the silhouettes of riders disappearing into the distance. It was 1878, and the Montana Territory still held as many promises as it did dangers. Lila had staked her claim after her father's passing, determined to honor his dream of building a life in this wild, beautiful country. "They burned my cabin," she cried, voice breaking as she fell to her knees in the dirt. The flames consumed everything she owned in the world: her mother's hand-stitched quilt, her father's pocket watch, the letter from her brother who'd gone east to Philadelphia and never returned. All of it gone. The crunch of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until a shadow fell across her. Looking up through tear-blurred eyes, she saw a tall figure dismounting from a chestnut stallion. "Miss, you hurt." The voice was deep, concerned, with a slight drawl that marked him as not originally from these parts. Lila struggled to her feet, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, a woman alone with her home destroyed. "They burned everything," she managed, gesturing helplessly at the smoking ruins. The stranger removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Name's Dawson Gentry," he said. "Was passing through when I saw the smoke." He studied the smoldering ruins, then looked back at her with a determination that made her breath catch. "Who did this to you, miss?" "Lila Whitman," she replied, finding her voice. "Maddox's men. They've been trying to push me off this land for months. Said a woman's got no business homesteading alone." Dawson's jaw tightened as he surveyed the destruction. The cabin was beyond saving, just a blackened skeleton of what had once been a home. "Then I'll build you one stronger," he said with quiet resolve. Lila stared at him, this stranger offering help when she had nothing to give in return. "Why would you do that?" "You don't know me." He placed his hat back on his head, adjusting it against the glare of the setting sun. "My pa taught me two things worth knowing: how to ride a horse and how to help folks who need it." He extended a calloused hand toward her. "Now, gather what you can. You'll stay at Widow Cooper's place in town until we sort this out." Lila hesitated, pride warring with desperation. "I can't leave my land. Maddox will claim it. We'll be back at first light," Dawson promised. "But you need shelter tonight." As they rode double on his horse toward the small settlement of Pine Creek, Lila clung to his solid frame, trying to reconcile the events of the day. She'd lost everything, yet found an unexpected ally in this quiet cowboy who'd appeared like a mirage in her darkest moment. Widow Cooper greeted them with concern etched on her weathered face. After hearing Lila's story, she ushered the young woman inside, promising a hot bath and clean clothes. Before Dawson departed, he caught Lila's gaze. "First thing tomorrow," he said simply, "we'll start rebuilding what they took from you." That night, as Lila lay in an unfamiliar bed, she wondered about the man who'd promised to help her. Dawson Gentry was a stranger, yet something in his steady gaze made her believe him when he said he would return. In a territory where promises were as fragile as morning mist, his words felt solid as the mountains rising in the distance. Dawn had barely broken when a knock came at the widow's door. Lila, already dressed in borrowed clothes, hurried to answer it. Dawson stood on the porch, hat in hand, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were 5 men, each with tools and determination in their eyes. "Morning, Miss Whitman," Dawson said. "These fellows heard what happened. They're ready to help." One of the men stepped forward. "Jim Parker, madam. Run the mercantile. Brought some supplies for you." He handed her a small cloth bundle. "Just some necessities till you're back on your feet." Lila swallowed hard against the emotion rising in her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. All of you," Maddox has been pushing too many folks around, another man added. About time someone pushed back. The group traveled to Lila's property, the morning sun burning away the dew on the grass. The charred remains of her cabin stood like a grave marker on the gentle rise overlooking the creek. Dawson immediately began assessing the damage and planning the new structure. We'll salvage what we can from the old foundation, he explained to Lila. But I'm thinking bigger, with proper windows and a porch where you can sit evenings. As the men began clearing debris, Lila worked alongside them, grateful for the activity to distract from her loss. By midday, the outline of a new cabin was marked, larger than her original home. "This is too much," she said to Dawson when they paused to eat the lunch Widow Cooper had packed. "I can't possibly repay, not asking for payment," he interrupted gently. "Just doing what's right." Over the coming days, a routine developed. Dawson would arrive at first light, sometimes with others, sometimes alone. They worked from sunrise until the shadows grew long, framing walls and raising roof beams. Lila learned that Dawson had been a ranch hand at the Broken Arrows spread to the north, taking odd jobs since the operation had changed hands. "Where did you learn to build like this?" she asked one afternoon, watching him measure and cut with precision. Dawson lined up a beam before answering. "Spent 2 years with a building crew in Denver after the war. Picked up a few things before the trail called me back." "The war? You fought?" He nodded, a shadow passing over his features. "Union cavalry. Wasn't much more than a boy, but saw things no man should." He hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "That's why I prefer building to tearing down these days." As they worked side by side, Lila found herself watching Dawson when he wasn't looking, the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the careful consideration he gave each task, the gentle way he handled the injured fox kit they found near the creek, nursing it back to health in a makeshift pen. "He reminds me of you," Dawson said one evening as they watched the fox cautiously exploring its enclosure. "Fierce despite being hurt, determined to survive." Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. "I'm not sure I'm as brave as you think." "Braver," he corrected, his eyes meeting hers. "Most men would have abandoned this claim after what happened. You're still here, still fighting." The walls of the cabin rose steadily, stronger and more substantial than the original structure. Dawson had designed it with care, thick logs fitted tightly, windows positioned to catch the morning light, a stone hearth that would hold heat through the bitter Montana winters. One morning, Lila arrived from town to find Dawson already working, but something was different. He brought flowers, wildflowers gathered from the meadow, and placed them in a jar on the newly built porch steps. "Place needed a woman's touch," he said simply when she noticed them. That evening, as they sat on the half-finished porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lila found the courage to ask the question that had been lingering. "Why are you really helping me, Dawson?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "When I came back from the war, I was lost. Drifted from place to place, taking work where I could find it. Wasn't living so much as existing." He looked at her then, his gaze direct. "The day I saw your cabin burning, I was passing through, heading nowhere in particular. But helping you, it gave me a purpose again." "And when the cabin is finished?" she asked, her heart beating faster. "Guess that depends," he replied softly. "On what?" "On whether you might need help with other things. Mending fences, breaking horses, building a life." The air between them seemed to still, charged with possibility. Lila could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could see the question in Dawson's eyes that he was too respectful to voice directly. "I might need help with all of those things," she answered finally. For a long while. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Good. Because I'm not in any hurry to move on." The following weeks brought changes beyond the rising cabin. Word spread about what had happened, and about the stand being taken against Maddox's intimidation. Other homesteaders who had suffered similar threats began to visit, bringing supplies, staying to help, and sharing stories. A community was forming around the act of rebuilding. Maddox himself remained suspiciously absent, though his men were occasionally spotted watching from a distance. Dawson made sure Lila was never alone, and the townspeople took to patrolling the area in informal shifts. "He won't risk moving against you openly now," Dawson explained. Too many eyes watching. As summer turned toward fall, the cabin neared completion. It stood proud on the hillside, twice the size of Lila's original home, with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides and shutters that could be secured against winter storms or unwelcome visitors. On the day they installed the door, a solid oak affair with iron hinges that Dawson had commissioned from the blacksmith in town, Lila stood back to admire their work. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Better than I ever imagined." "One thing left," Dawson said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small carved wooden sign. "Every home should have a name." The sign read Phoenix Ranch, the letters carefully burned into the wood. Because it rose from the ashes, Lila realized, touching the smooth surface. Dawson nodded, hammering it into place above the door. "And because you did too." That evening, they celebrated with a small gathering. Widow Cooper brought a stew, Jim Parker contributed a bottle of good whiskey, and others arrived with chairs, dishes, and even a small table gifts to help furnish the new home. As twilight settled over the land, someone produced a fiddle, and music filled the air. Lila found herself watching Dawson as he talked with the townspeople, struck by how seamlessly he had woven himself into the fabric of her life. He caught her eye across the porch and made his way to her side. "Dance with me?" he asked, offering his hand. Under the stars, with the scent of pine and the newly cut wood of her cabin surrounding them, Lila stepped into Dawson's arms. They moved together to the lilting melody, her hand in his other hand respectfully at her waist. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly, "for everything." "No need," he replied. "Seeing you smile again is thanks enough." She looked up at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her. "When I lost the cabin, I thought I'd lost everything. I never imagined that day would bring me something far more valuable." Dawson's step faltered slightly, and she could see the question in his eyes. "You," she clarified, her voice barely above a whisper. "It brought me you." He stopped dancing then, his hand still holding hers, the fiddle continuing its melody in the background. "Lila," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I came here thinking I was helping you rebuild a home, but the truth is, you've helped me find one." Before she could respond, a shout from the edge of the property interrupted the moment. One of the townsmen was running toward them, rifle in hand. "Riders coming," he called. "Looks like Maddox and his men." The music stopped abruptly. Men reached for weapons while women gathered children close. Dawson positioned himself in front of Lila, his expression hardening from tenderness to resolve in an instant. "Get inside," he told her. "Bar the door." "No," she refused, reaching for the rifle that hung above the door. "This is my home. I'll defend it alongside you." A group of 7 riders approached, dust rising from their horses' hooves in the last light of day. At their lead was Ernest Maddox, a bulky man with a flamboyant mustache and cold eyes. He reined his horse to stop a few yards from the porch, taking in the gathering with obvious surprise. "Quite a party you're having, Miss Whitman," he called. "Shame about the invitation getting lost." "You weren't invited," Lila replied evenly, the rifle steady in her hands. "And you're not welcome here." Maddox's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the armed townspeople. "Seems you've made some friends since our last encounter." "Friends who don't appreciate you burning women's homes," Jim Parker called out, stepping forward. "Or trying to steal land that isn't yours." "Strong accusations," Maddox replied smoothly. "I had nothing to do with any fire. Terrible accident, I heard." "No accident, daus un xallanja." Your men were seen riding away. Maddox studied Dawson with new interest. Don't believe we've met, stranger. Dawson Gentry. And I'm not a stranger here anymore. A tense silence followed as Maddox calculated his odds. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and clearly unprepared for the show of solidarity. I came to make an offer on this property, he finally said, addressing Lila directly. Good money. More than it's worth. It's not for sale, she responded firmly. Not today. Not ever. Maddox's face darkened. You might want to reconsider, Miss Whitman. A woman alone, she's not alone, Dawson interrupted, stepping closer to Lila. The other townspeople moved forward as well, forming a solid front. For a moment, it seemed Maddox might escalate the confrontation. His hand hovered near his pistol, and his men shifted restlessly. Then, with a calculating look that promised this wasn't over, he inclined his head in mock politeness. As you wish. But remember my offer when winter comes and you're struggling to maintain this impressive new structure. His gaze lingered on the cabin. Would be a shame if something happened to it again. That sounded like a threat, Sheriff Thomas Jenkins said, emerging from the group. The badge on his chest caught the fading light. And I don't take kindly to threats in my jurisdiction. Maddox's expression soured further at the sheriff's appearance. Just stating facts, Sheriff. Nothing more. Then I suggest you and your men move along, Jenkins replied. And stay clear of Miss Whitman's property from now on. With a final glare, Maddox wheeled his horse around. This isn't over, he muttered, loud enough for those closest to hear before he and his men galloped away. The tension lingered after they disappeared into the gathering darkness. Sheriff Jenkins turned to Lila, his expression grave. Maddox won't give up easily. He's been buying up land all through the valley, and your creek access makes this property particularly valuable to him. Then we'll be vigilant, Dawson said. And prepared. As the excitement of the confrontation faded, the guests gradually departed, promising to return the next day to continue helping with the final touches on the cabin. Sheriff Jenkins stationed 2 deputies nearby as a precaution. When only Dawson and Lila remained, they sat together on the porch steps, the night air cool against their skin. Are you afraid? Dawson asked softly. Lila considered the question, looking out at her land, the silver ribbon of creek water reflecting moonlight, the silhouettes of pines against the star-studded sky, the solid presence of her new home behind her. Not of Maddox, she answered truthfully. But of losing all this again? Yes. Dawson took her hand, his touch reassuring. We won't let that happen. We, she repeated, finding comfort in the word. It's strange. A month ago I was alone, determined to prove I could make it on my own. Now I can't imagine facing this without you, without everyone who's helped. Sometimes strength comes from knowing when to stand together, he said, and when to let others stand with you. In the days that followed, Lila's property transformed further. Men from town built a sturdier fence around the perimeter. Others helped construct a small barn for the livestock Lila hoped to acquire. Widow Cooper organized the women to sew curtains and quilts, replacing those lost in the fire. Dawson was a constant presence, sleeping in the barn loft at night, working alongside Lila by day. Their relationship deepened in quiet moments, sharing coffee at sunrise, talking late into the evening by lamplight, exchanging glances that conveyed more than words could express. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence damaged in a brief but violent thunderstorm, Lila broached a subject that had been on her mind. Widow Cooper asked when we're getting married, she said, watching Dawson's reaction carefully. His hands stilled on the wire he was stretching. Did she now?
She did.
Says it's improper for you to be staying here otherwise. Lila kept her tone light, though her heart was racing. I told her we hadn't discussed it. Dawson straightened, wiping his hands on his pants before meeting her gaze. And what would you have said if we had discussed it? Lila felt her cheeks warm under his steady look. I suppose that would depend on what you asked. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. If I were to ask, Lila Whitman, would you consider building more than just a cabin with me? Her breath caught in her throat. I would, she whispered. I would consider it very seriously. Dawson took her hand, his expression solemn yet tender. I don't have much to offer beyond these 2 hands and a promise to use them in your service for as long as I draw breath. Those hands built me a home when I had nothing, Lila replied, her voice steady despite the emotion rising within her. They're worth more than gold to me. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Instinctively, Dawson moved in front of Lila, but she recognized the lead rider as Jim Parker from town. Lila. Dawson, Parker called, reining his horse to a stop. Sheriff sent us. Maddox's men tried to dam the creek upstream. They're diverting the water away from your property. Dawson's expression hardened. How many men? 4 or 5. Sheriff's gathering a posse now. Without water from the creek, Lila's land would be worthless for raising crops or livestock, precisely what Maddox wanted. It was a clever tactic, less obvious than burning her cabin, but potentially more devastating. We'll ride with you, Dawson decided, already moving toward the barn where their horses were kept. Lila followed, determination in every step. I'm coming too. He looked as if he might object, then nodded. Stay close to me. They rode hard, following the creek upstream to where it narrowed between rocky banks. As they approached, they could see men working to pile boulders and fallen trees across the water. Sheriff Jenkins and several deputies were already there, weapons drawn. That's far enough, Maddox, Jenkins shouted. Ernest Maddox stood supervising the work, a rifle cradled in his arms. His men paused at the sheriff's arrival, looking to their boss for direction. We're on public land, Sheriff, Maddox called back. Nothing illegal about improving the waterway. Diverting a natural water source from established homesteads is illegal by territorial law, Jenkins countered. You know that as well as I do. Maddox's expression darkened as he spotted Lila and Dawson joining the sheriff's group. Miss Whitman. Still letting others fight your battles, I see. I'm fighting my own battles, Lila replied, dismounting alongside Dawson. But I'm grateful not to fight them alone. As the standoff continued, more riders arrived from town, until Maddox's men were significantly outnumbered. The tension grew palpable, hands hovering near weapons, each side waiting for the other to make a move. It was Dawson who broke the stalemate, stepping forward with his hands deliberately away from his holstered pistol. This ends today, Maddox, he said, his voice carrying across the space between them. You can't buy or bully your way into owning this entire valley. Can't I? Maddox sneered. Money talks, cowboy. And I've got plenty. So do others, Jim Parker interjected. The ranchers and merchants in town have formed an association. We've pooled resources to fight land grabs like yours. This was news to Lila, and from Dawson's surprised glance, to him as well. Parker continued, addressing the gathered crowd as much as Maddox. We're filing formal complaints with the territorial government about your tactics. We have sworn statements from 3 families you've intimidated off their land. And we've telegraphed for a federal marshal to investigate. Maddox's face reddened with fury. You're bluffing. The marshal arrives on tomorrow's stage, Sheriff Jenkins confirmed. I'd suggest you and your men vacate this area and cease interference with Miss Whitman's water rights immediately. For a long moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then, with a gesture of disgust, Maddox lowered his rifle. This isn't the end, he warned. No backwater town can stand against what's coming. Progress, gentlemen. And it waits for no one. Progress doesn't need to come at the expense of decent folks' livelihoods, Dawson replied. There's room for everyone to prosper. Maddox spat on the ground before mounting his horse. We'll see about that. He signaled to his men, who reluctantly abandoned their dam-building efforts and followed him away from the creek. Once they were gone, the tension broke like a fever. Men clapped each other on the back while others began dismantling the partial dam to restore the creek's flow. "You knew about this association?" Lila asked Parker as they worked. The merchant nodded. "Been organizing it quietly for weeks. After what happened to your cabin, folks realized we needed to stand together or Maddox would pick us off one by one." "Thank you," she said simply, emotion making it difficult to say more. As they rode back to the Phoenix Ranch that evening, Lila and Dawson traveled side by side in comfortable silence. The confrontation with Maddox had changed something, solidifying the connection between them and with the community. "So," Dawson said as they approached the cabin, now glowing golden in the sunset. "About that question Widow Cooper asked." Lila smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in months. "About when we're getting married?" "Yes, that one." He guided his horse closer to hers. "I'm thinking the first frost would be a fine time, before winter sets in proper." "Are you asking me to marry you, Dawson Gentry?" she teased, though her voice trembled slightly. He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I am. Will you build a life with me, Lila? Here, on this land you've fought so hard to keep." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. The first frost came early that year, gilding the grass and painting the mountains white against the blue October sky. The town turned out in force for the wedding, held on the porch of the cabin that had become a symbol of resilience and community. Lila wore a dress of soft blue that Widow Cooper had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Dawson stood tall in a new shirt, his normally serious face transformed by a smile that never faded as Sheriff Jenkins, who also served as the local magistrate, performed the ceremony. As they spoke their vows, Lila looked past Dawson to the cabin behind him, solid, beautiful, and stronger than the one that had burned. Like her heart, like the love that had grown from ashes into something unbreakable. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Jenkins declared, and cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Dawson pulled Lila into a gentle kiss, then whispered against her ear, "Welcome home, Mrs. Gentry." Years later, when their children asked how they met, Dawson would begin the story the same way. "Your mother was standing in front of a burning cabin, tears on her face but fire in her eyes, and I knew right then she was the strongest person I'd ever meet." And Lila would add, "And your father said he'd build me one stronger." He kept that promise, and everyone since. The Phoenix Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the valley. Ernest Maddox eventually overextended his finances and lost most of his holdings. The creek continued to flow, nourishing the land and the family that grew there, a testament to what could be built from loss when the right hands and hearts came together to build something stronger.